Hi, my name is Emily Zambiazzi, and today I will be discussing the dioxin crisis that occurred in Times Beach, Missouri. Here are the objectives for you to understand about the Times Beach disaster after watching this presentation. We will discuss the timeline of events, the dioxin soil contamination by location, exposure risks and health effects, incineration of materials as part of the Times Beach cleanup, and the outcomes of the Times Beach disaster. This timeline shows the amount of time that elapsed from the initial contamination in the early 70s to when Times Beach was finally cleaned up in the 1990s. We will explore each of these points in further detail. Agent Orange was sprayed in the Vietnam War as a herbicide to kill food crops as well as foliage surrounding U.S. military bases. In the 1960s, the military used the Hoffman-Taff Chemical Company to produce a chemical used in Agent Orange. The Hoffman-Taff Chemical Company also produced a chemical called hexachlorophene, which is used in antibacterial soaps. The combination of these two chemicals yielded a byproduct called TCDD, which is the most dangerous dioxin. In this presentation, I will use dioxin and TCDD interchangeably. So how is the soil in Times Beach contaminated with dioxin? A man named Russell Bliss took the waste oil being stored in tanks at the Hoffman-Taff Chemical Company and sprayed it on dirt roads and horse arenas to reduce dust. Within just one day of spraying, horses and small birds died, and a child was hospitalized after becoming ill. Throughout the 70s, Bliss continued to spray dirt roads throughout Times Beach and 25 other areas of Missouri. This map shows the extent of the soil contamination in Times Beach by the roads that were sprayed. After the animals and child became ill in 1971, the CDC finally began to investigate a possible soil contamination in 1974. This bar graph shows the 25 areas that Russell Bliss sprayed the waste oil and the volume of the TCDD contamination in cubic yards. As you can see, Times Beach was the most contaminated. To make matters worse, in 1982, the Merrimack River was flooded. As you can see, the flooding was quite extensive. The CDC and EPA became concerned about the spread of dioxin due to the flooding. Just 1 month after the town was alerted of the dioxin contamination, they recommended that the town be permanently evacuated. The EPA bought out over 800 homes, and Times Beach was added to the national priorities list and became a Superfund site. This helped increase awareness and funding to clean up Times Beach. This table shows the dangers of dioxin. 90% of dioxin exposure occurs through food consumption, such as meat, dairy, and fish. Waste incineration and combustion that occurs in cigarette smoking, as well as soil consumption and dust inhalation, are also ways that humans can be exposed to dioxin. The half-life in humans is 7 to 11 years, and the dioxin is stored in fatty tissue. The half-life in soil is even longer. In topsoil, it exists for 9 to 15 years, and below the surface, 25 to 100 years. The known health effects include chloracne, which produces severe skin lesions, as well as cancer. Ongoing research is being done about the reproductive, immune, endocrine, and nervous systems. The most vulnerable groups include newborns and young children. The minimum level of concern in soil for it to be considered contaminated is 0.5 parts per billion. Although the population was originally exposed from 1971 to 1976, the TCDD levels in adipose tissue were not tested until 1985. This being said, those that were exposed at horse arenas still had the highest detectable amount of TCDD levels in their adipose or fatty tissue. The second highest were those that lived near sprayed roads, and the smallest amount occurred in those that had no known exposure to TCDD. In 1996, the town was finally cleaned up through incineration, but what did this mean for the nearby residents? Soil was excavated and incinerated, as well as homes, businesses, and even the water tower. Did the incineration of all this material affect the health of nearby residents? A study was done comparing the TCDD in the blood of an exposed group who lived within 4 miles of the incineration and a control group who lived 12 miles outside of the incineration. The test was conducted before the incineration, during, and after the incineration. There was no statistically significant increase in TCDD in the blood during the incineration. There was actually a decrease. This implies that there was no human health impacts of incineration of dioxin-containing material at Times Beach. What is Times Beach like today? In 2001, it was removed from the National Priorities List when the EPA determined that Times Beach was no longer a public health threat. They still conduct regular soil tests as shown in this photo. Now, Times Beach is Route 66 State Park, a public green space to enjoy boating, fishing, hiking, and cycling. In summary, dioxin was sprayed on roads and horse arenas for dust control across Missouri. After a child became ill, the CDC and eventually the EPA investigated, and Times Beach was found to have the most contamination of dioxin. The town was permanently evacuated in 1982 after a major flood, and it wasn't until the 1990s that the soil and contaminated material in Times Beach was incinerated. The incineration was found to not affect the health of residents and surrounding areas. Times Beach is now a thriving Route 66 state park. Thank you for watching this presentation on Times Beach.